So just a couple of bits to finish up on this section. Very careful to make sure you've got the right cursor to get these boundaries moving and the crossover taking place. Don't move anything in time, otherwise it will go completely out of sync. As you've seen, you know, I could record another take into that section and have a third and a fourth and a fifth to play with. Two other things we can do, and then you can select any of those. Look, it's gone from take 2 to take 1 again, which would be defeating the object altogether. Back to take 2. Whichever of those is selected currently will be the one that plays. Now it's possible with this item, this is the middle item, to play all the takes. If I right click in that middle item, go to item settings, play all takes, it'll now play both of those. Sounds hideous, but now I've got an overdub instead of a replacement, and I could right click on take 2, go to the take menu, go to take volume envelope, and if I were to zoom in now, you'll not see this probably. The take volume, oh, it's a bit of take 1, take, select the second take volume envelope. See the thin red line there. I can adjust the volume of that up and down, so my overdub can now be quieter, louder. I can pan it, I can do all kinds of things with it. For the moment I'm just going to undo all of that. So we're going to just have a look at the second method for doing this whole thing. So if I rewind, there we go, to the point where I've got just my original track with the error in it. Instead of doing a time selection, what I can do is I can split these and do a what's called a auto punch a selected item. So if I change the record mode to that, what it'll do now is, instead of recording into the time selection that we created, it will record a second take for any selected item. Now I've just selected the whole take there, which would be a bit pointless. But what I can do is, if I get to roughly where I want the transitions to take place, right click that item, split the item at the cursor, do the same towards the end of my take, split that item there. I've now created myself 3 items. If I rewind the transport now, and make sure that only the middle section is highlighted by control clicking on it, we'll do exactly the same and just record into that middle section, hopefully. Save that, and there you go, two takes created again, and I can, you know, using my fancy cursors, create a crossover. Much easier to do this way, I don't know why, but the crossovers just appear a lot more red. Now that's what I don't want to do, create a gap using the wrong cursor. So if I undo that, if I find the right cursor, wrong one again, undo that. There we go. I've got my crossovers. I can move the transition points. Same kind of thing. It's a bit easier to create the transitions using this mode. There we go again, a reasonable stitch in about 2 minutes. And there we go, that's the alternate method. So we had the time selection punch in or the selected item punch in. method of creating a second take just in a particular region of our track. So that's auto punch recording. A few additional bits worthy of note. You know, both methods, the time selection or the punch into a selected item, end up with the same result. You end up with an item over here, which was your original take. You end up with the tail end of the original take as a third item, and you end up with this item in the middle with the two takes in it now. And you can add a third, a fourth, a fifth, and take your pick as to which one you like the best. As we've seen already, if I right click in that item, go to item settings, I can play all of those takes if I really wanted to, and I've got an overdub. Normally if I'm correcting an error, I wouldn't have play all takes selected. The other thing you can do, if you wish, if you remember when I was recording in both cases, when I hit the time selection or when I hit the selected item, the original take dropped out and all you could hear was what I was re-recording. You might like that, you might not. You can, if you go to the monitor button, right click on it and select monitor track media when recording, that will stop the first take dropping out when you're recording the second take. You might like that, it might put you off, who knows. It's an option that you can use whenever the mood takes you. Just rewind the project back to where we started. There is another thing you can do, another way you can do this. It's not so good for editing, it's more useful for overdubbing. But instead of creating new takes, what you can do is create free positioning items within a track. The way to do that is highlight the track that you are interested in, right click somewhere in the grey space and enable this thing called enable track free item positioning, which is normally set to off. What we can then do is record additional items into this track, and again you can do it using time selection auto punch. You could do it throughout the track. I'm just going to record a little overdub just to demonstrate what's going off. And for some reason I want it playing during that section of the track. Save that. Now, interestingly, the audio for the first track dropped out there. In this case, it might be better to have had the track monitoring on when I was recording. So let's delete that and do it again. It might have helped me keeping something like time. So now I've got a completely separate item. It's not a new take, it's a completely separate item in the track. Now I could, if I wanted to, if that had been a re-recording of part of the original track, I could go into this item, fade out the bit I don't like, then fade it back in again for the bit I do like, and similarly fade this track in and out. So I could correct errors this way, but it'd be really painful and complicated compared to what we've just done. But that's quite useful for adding overdubs. You know, and you could do things to that track, or that item, sorry, like fade it in a bit better so it doesn't sound as ridiculous. Fade it out. So you get the idea. Probably more useful for adding overdubs to a track, as I say, without, you know, creating a whole nother track in its own right, which would be another way of creating an overdub. So there we go. That's the third method for doing additional recording into single track. Hope that helped.